Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids, and today we've got, I think, hopefully a very interesting video. I just watched a cool video from Shinny, which is about the faction lords and predicting what ones might be meta in the future, right? Which factions to watch out for. And yeah, that got me thinking, it's time for a good old deep dive prediction video about the sort of champions that I think we could see for these factions and some inspiration. We are going to be drawing very much from one of my favorite game series here today. That is none other than Warhammer. So for instance, we're going to be looking at the Ogres first of all. We'll be checking that out and talking about some of them and some examples of characters from the Total War Warhammer games, where there's a lot of pretty close parallels, honestly. So it should be pretty fun. But yeah, like I think it's something they've succeeded well at, honestly, with the faction guardians. You know, their strengths are vary a bit for sure, you know, and that's what Shinny's video is about. But you know, Aislinn, he sort of captures that very sort of normal human protect my dudes. I'm a knight protecting. He sort of captures that idea. For the high elves, you've got Fina. It's all about like we're fast, we're buffing up. It's a bit complicated. Very high elven. For the Sacred Order, we've got Falmond, who's basically a space marine, right? Space marine, and he's got. I love this. You know, more damage against corrupted alliance. That's something you see, I think, in both Constantine and Cardiel have it. Really fits the theme of the faction. Or then we've got Dune Lord Gregor, who is really boring, so he fits really well in the barbarians. Now he's my least favorite one. I think he's sort of like the whole like rally the tribes sort of vibe. Definitely my least favorite. So the most recent one's been a bit of a dud in my eyes, but the other three I think have honestly been fantastic and really capture. I think even Dune Lord's not bad, but they capture the essence of the faction really well. So let's talk about it. Let's dive in. First of all, we've got Ogre tribes. I mean, at an initial glance, guys, just at the legendaries and the mythical, Ogre tribes, this has got to be a chunky boy, right? We want a chunker. They have a couple of attack based, and even Big Un feels like a pretty chunky attack based. War Mother is a pretty chunky attack based. They're all chunky. I guess Gurgo's also attack, but like, it's a very chunky faction. You know, Grazor, he's really with the two shields, speaks very Ogren to me. We've got Togron in there, and we'll come back to him in a second. Let's jump over and let's get some inspiration, shall we? So the Ogre faction in Total War Warhammer 3, they have two different legendary lords. Let's take a little look at them. First of all, they've got Greasus. And what is Greasus? This gives you a bit of a sense for him. He's a big, massive, fat ogre, and he travels around the fight in a cart, right? He just sort of smacks people with a big hunk of meat. He's absolutely ridiculous, a real comedy character. I think, though, he's actually fairly similar to Togron, right? Togron definitely has a food theme to him. He's got like this crown made out of cutlery. They're different. They're not the same, but I think they're too similar. The other option in there then is Scrag the Slaughterer, and this gives you a sense for him. He's brutal, you know, he's got a hook for a hand. He's sort of like Tulf the Maimed, but cool, basically. So I think we're a little bit limited. Ogres is actually one of the tougher ones to get an example for from this. They're also Knights Revenant. They're the other faction that's tough. We'll see when we get there. But I do think I'd love to see. We have not seen a HP based faction unity champion yet. I think some big chunky ogre. My favorite from those two would be Scrag. I think would fit a bit better. Honestly, I prefer Greasus, honestly, but Greasus I feel is maybe a bit too simple. I could see that being cool. Just big fat guy, just powering up the team. He's just super chunky, makes them super tanky. I think that could fit really well. Just we're a bunch of big old tanky boys, and the team is really hard to kill. Wouldn't be a super powerful faction, I would say. It's not bad, but not super powerful. Next up is the Lizards, and you've got some really cool examples in here in Total War at Warhammer 3. So let's take a look at them. We're going to start with, they've got a real mix. Let's actually open up all of these and let's go. And let me delete these as we go. Get rid of them. But the Lizards, I think we look at the Lizards in game. They're quite a mix, honestly, aren't they? There's quite a mix. You've got good attack champions like, you know, Fushan and Romantu's even sort of an attacky debuffer. Even Dracomorph. Attacking debuffers are fairly common here, actually, and that's maybe something I'd like to see, but I'll show you. My inspiration from Warhammer 3 puts it in a very different direction from what you might expect. but they've got good supports. They've got good tanks. They've got good damage. They've got a lot of stuff. Let's look at our inspiration and let's judge it from that. So first of all, this is my front runner, very much so, is Lord Mazdamundi. He's basically a giant toad in a throne, and he floats around, and he is one of the most powerful spellcasters in the game. So he is just blowing fools up left, right, and center. I actually think that would be a perfect type of legendary faction unity or mythical champ for the lizards. We don't have a big toad. Well, I mean, we've got Taragi the Frog is maybe the closest thing. I think it would fit super well and be pretty cool. Maybe be more of a focus instead of just pure damage. Maybe bringing in some debuffs, like Fushan is bringing in the decreased defense and the stuns, or Dracomorph's bringing in decreased defense, weaken, and the poisons, or Krokmar. He's even doing some debuffs. You know, they've quite a focus on debuffs, so that could actually work pretty well. So he's a strong front runner. You've got Krokgar. He's maybe a bit too similar to like a Ramantu without wings, but just badass lizard. I think he's got a robot arm and a big spear. Then you've got some smaller lizards, which I don't think would work quite as well. Tic-Tac-Toe, he flies around on a pterodactyl or something. Dehenawen, he's sort of a lizard priest. That could be kind of interesting, actually. He's got like, I think he's got a tablet. It's like the 10 Commandments almost. That he carries around, so that could be interesting. Gorok, I think he's maybe a bit too similar in vibe to failing on the names, Razin, right? Just, you know, the tanky guy with his shield and a big mace. He's super tanky. He could be cool. Nakai the Wanderer, he's a big old crocodile. Again, I would say that's maybe very similar to Krokmar, really. And then their final one is Oxyotl, who's actually quite interesting. He's like a chameleon skink. So he's like sneaking around, really stealthy, doing lots of poisons. That could actually work as well, potentially. Again, instead of being a debuffing nuker, more focused on debuffs. So those would be two things I'd actually like to probably, they'd be my favorite, probably, would be something totally out of left field, like a small little lizard that's more sneaky and working with, yeah, more sneaky, or the big massive toad that's either putting out a ton of debuffs or blowing them up with a bunch of AoE nukes or something like that. I think all of those things could fit pretty well. The lizards are pretty flexible, honestly. Then let's jump over to the Skinwalkers. This one is actually fairly rough to get examples. There's two factions that are somewhat similar, and those are, let me X this stuff off, here we go. We've got the Beastmen, and we've got the Skaven. I think they're very similar. So the Beastmen, if we open them up, they are more just big old bulls and stuff like that. You got some weird ones. This guy's quite weird. He has wings and he flies. He's sort of like a flying cow demon thing. They're all sort of big cow demons. Torox, he's probably the coolest one. He's like a big minotaur covered in armor. That's kind of cool. I don't know if I love that for the Skinwalkers in game, though. I don't know if that super fits. They're more varied. That's sort of my vibe. The Skinwalkers are quite a varied faction with lots of different animals, whereas the Beastmen and Warhammer are, well, like all of these are some form of bull, which is not quite right. Then you've also got, again, another very limited faction. You've got the Skaven. They're all a bunch of rats, but you've got a few ones in here that are cool, and there's one that stood out to me as would actually be a really interesting thing to bring in somewhere. So you've got Weak Headtaker. He's a big warrior rat. Okay. Lord Skrulk, that's quite a fun one. He's like a poison rat spreading plague. Love that. That could be sick. Tretch Craventail. I actually don't even know what this guy does. He seems pretty boring. Ikit Claw. This guy is probably the most famous one from Total War Warhammer 2. He's all about technology and stuff like that. Really doesn't fit with Raid, but he's an amazing character. Just a mad scientist. Super badass character. This is probably my favorite option, which is Deathmaster Snikch, which is a really difficult name to say, but he's like an assassin rat. I love that idea. He's a rat who's an assassin, master assassin, just doing crazy ninja shit. That would be awesome. Or then you've got Throt the Unclean, who's the big mutant rat. I think that could fit well as well. My front runner would probably be Deathmaster Snikch. I think that's something that's not quite in here. But, you know, you don't have a ton of supports, so that's maybe something. You know, you've got Bambus and Uko, Loriaka. You know, it's not exactly a faction that impresses with its support roster. They're more offensive. I think having like the sort of assassin rat, putting himself into Veil, doing sorts of tricks, picking people off, big single target damage could be quite fun, because you got some pretty powerful AoE damage dealers here with Razelvark, Gwendolyn, Nishak, Samson. etc. Even Tumesius Leorius, they've got quite a lot of AoE. Maybe a single target damage dealer that synergizes could be kind of cool. Coming over to the Orcs then. Oh, the Orcs. Classic. We've got the green skins, as they're called, which is bigger than just Orcs in Warhammer. It's goblins and all sorts of stuff as well. For me, when I think of the Orcs, let's look at the in-raid Orcs first. It's definitely a bit of an underwhelming faction. I actually think the Skinwalker faction unity champion could be really strong. That would be, I think Lizardmen could be decent potential. Ogre, I feel a bit limited. Lizards could be decent. I think that the Skinwalker faction is actually really, really good now. So if they do go, like I said, maybe a support route, which is something they lack, that could be great. Or they go for more of an assassin-y kind of route, damage route, that could be great too. Orcs definitely feels on the weaker end. They're a bit underwhelming. One thing that strikes me when I look at the Orcs is they're very offensive. They have a lot of attacking champions, right? I think, though, actually, my initial thought, therefore, was, well, they should have, an attack-focused faction unity champion that brings that together and exemplifies what it means to be an orc. But I actually think I prefer something that's a bit of a combo of, like, Angar, Warlord, Iron Brago. I think he's the only defense champion in the faction, but I think that would be perfect, actually, for the Orcs. A big... the big leader of the Orcs, this big armored guy that's all about that taunt debuff, taunting enemies to attack him. He's like, yeah, come at me. He's rallied all the Orcs together. He takes damage, and I'd actually like to see him be almost like Iron Brago plus Angar plus Argala, or like Ultimate Death Knight plus, maybe Ultimate Death Knight plus Argala is the better option. Just he takes all the attacks, but then he's like cleaving them, decreasing their defense. Maybe the lower his health goes, the more defense he gets. So I'd like to see a big defensive nuker that's all about just smashing the enemy defenses and leaving them vulnerable. That he's like, yeah, he's the big orc warlord, and then the rest of the orcs come in and clean up behind him, that he is leading the charge. I actually think that would also fit really well with the faction and let the faction be more complete in different areas. So that's something I would love to see. I think Grimgor is like the perfect example of that, honestly. Leader of the Black Orcs. I mean, like, he's just a big armored Black Orc that's just an absolute beast. And he's really angry and he smashes everyone. He's the best, as he says. They also have like sort of a shaman. That could be kind of cool. He's a goblin. That wouldn't really fit with orcs in the game. Another sort of shaman-y type character. Again, not huge with the orcs. And then Grom the Paunch. This guy would actually work pretty well for the ogres. He's an orc that just like loves eating stuff. Again, he's got the big, I don't know, leg of some sort of deer leg. I'm not sure what it is. He's got a big leg of meat. He also travels around. He's very like the Greasus ogre I talked about earlier. He travels around in a cart, stuffing his face with food. He's got a big cauldron. That could work too, like a support. But I would, for the orcs, pretty strongly be wanting something like Grimgor would be my preference. Big, tanky, taunt the enemy, tank for the orcs, be the leader that the orcs need, and they could add a lot to the faction. Demon Spawn, very, very powerful faction. This one would have definitely a lot of potential, and there's a real good mix here. You've got really powerful defensive supports, like with your Duchess. You've got nukers like Canderfon, Hefrak, Heimar, etc. I think Carnage, big nukers, they've got sort of everything. Now, one thing which we do see actually a lot with the demons, and this I think would be probably a fun direction to go, is actually HP burn, which is maybe not the first thing you think about when you look at the demons, or you think about demon spawn, but when I look at it, you're like Tyrant with HP burn, Drextar's all about the burns, Sissia with burns, Vassal with burns. It's quite a few actually in there doing burns. I'd like to see actually something like that. Again, burning enemies, debuffing them, I don't know, maybe smacking really hard. Probably, actually, you know what? Probably blowing up HP burn would be ideal. Maybe a big damage dealer that blows up burns and could combo well with it, like combo well with Sissia. That could be quite fun. Or what? I don't know, something like that. Maybe is what I'd like to see. It's hard to find good parallels, actually, with Warhammer. You've got the Demons of Chaos that would fit fairly well. Their leader is the Demon Prince. He's a bit generic. You can sort of customize him. That's his deal in the game, is you get different body parts and you combine them. Because obviously, if you guys know about any Warhammer lore, their demons are much more fleshed out. And these all featured in Warhammer Warhammer 3, actually. You've got Nurgle, which is all about... Let's actually just look at the main ones for these. Keep it simple, shall we? But they've got like their 4 gods of chaos. You've got Nurgle, who's the god of decay. Doesn't really fit with the demon spawn in Raid. You know, big, poison, disease, that sort of stuff. Kugath. You've got Nakari. He could fit, honestly, with the demons in Raid. They're Slanesh. They're like, I don't know, the demons of sex, I guess. Sex demons. But yeah, I mean, he's pretty disgusting looking. Yeah, I think he could actually fit pretty well. You've got Kairos. He's the god of Sinch, which is sort of like magic and chaos, I guess. That could... I don't know if that fits that well with Demon Spawn in Raid. My favorite would probably be Khorne and Scarbrand, and you could see this fits with the demon theme. Big red demon on fire. It's the most simple and straightforward demonic one, so that would probably be my preference, would be something like Scarbrand. It's a big, I do damage, I explode HP burn. I think that would fit well. I'd like to see HP burn feature because it's kind of tough to say that's an iconic aspect of other factions. It'd be kind of cool for that to be iconic for demons, to define them. Next up, we come to the Undead. Very powerful faction. This is probably the faction that would have the most, Shinny talked about in his video, and I encourage you to watch that, the most probably PvP potential. Although their mythical is not a PvP champion at all, but there will be more mythicals coming. But, you know, for PvP specifically, they've got Sifi, Rotus, Ultimate Death Knight, Necret's in there as well. So yeah, I think with this faction, probably the direction I'd like to see one of 2 directions. So number 1 could be a ghost like Sifi and Rotus. I think that would work pretty well. Number 2 would probably be a vampire. So you have the Mashald vampire theme, or I mean Bloodgorge vampire. You got a lot of vampires. I mean Vlad. And then you've got Volcanan, a bit of a vampire type theme as well. That's something like, yeah, something like that. If we look over at Warhammer, I think the vampire counts are the closest example here. They've got a few different ones in here, so let's take a look at them. So they've got Manfred von Karstein. He's like bald vampire in black armor. Pretty cool, straightforward. Vlad would be maybe a bit more my preference, more so. He's again just big armored vampire. He's got no nose. He's pretty badass, and he's called Vlad. He's the kind of the stereotypical vampire, tanky badass. This, I will say, Isabella would probably be my preference out of all of these, though. Isabella, this is the idea of just, you know, female vampire, powerful, beautiful. I think it sort of fits with Sifi. Then they've got Heinrich, who's sort of a necromancer, and Helman Gorst, who's also sort of necromancer. You could have a sort of a necromancer, but that doesn't super fit with the undead hordes in the game. For me, I would like to see probably a combination of like Rotus plus Vlad. I think you combine the 2, like especially I think Vitality Plunder from Rotus, and like destroy enemy max HP and boost himself up. He becomes tankier, harder to kill. He starts hitting harder. And then you combine that with more vampire theming from Vlad and more of an AoE focus. And that could fit really well into the faction and be pretty scary, especially when you've got, you know, like Necret, Ultimate Death Knight, Sifi in there, support for Arena. That could be powerful. And yeah, it'd be pretty cool. But I do think some sort of vampire, like taking their vitality for yourself, becoming stronger, that sort of thing would be pretty cool. Knights Revenant. This doesn't have, I think, a good... Oh, sorry, I skipped Dark Elves. I was looking at my list over here and I was like, wait, where are the Dark Elves? So Undead Horde, though, would be pretty powerful. Dark Elves, definitely a bit of a weaker faction. Like, I honestly feel like Dark Elves are pretty hard carried by their faction by Lydia Vizix Mithrala, right? The free champions are really the best ones. You know, there's other champs in here that aren't bad, for sure, but they are the best ones. There's definitely something of a poison theme to this faction, I think, especially between the Kales, right? Kale is maybe the most iconic, so poison. That could be a direction that you could go. Placing or blowing up poisons doesn't synergize super well with, I mean, a bit with Mithrala. It's an option. Let's take a look at the Dark Elves in Warhammer and see what they've got going on. Again, they're a bit more of a funkier faction. So let's take a look at the legendary lords for that in the games. We've got Malekith. He's basically Dark Elf Darth Vader. pretty much. He'd actually probably fit well enough with Knights Revenant, funny enough. Don't feel like he'd super fit the Witch King of Angmar or something, or is that Lord of the Rings? I don't know. Witch King of Nagarond, something like that. You've got Morathi, who's his mother. She's like a bit bland, I think, honestly, at least from her picture. Crone Hellebron, I think this one could be a kind of interesting dark elf theme to go for in raid. I think that she'd actually fit pretty well. Her whole thing is like she's getting older and she has to like sacrifice a bunch of slaves and stuff to recover her youth. And yeah, she's kind of like insane. Yeah, she's quite cool. They got Lokir Fellheart, who's like a pirate. Wouldn't really fit with raid. Although funny enough, with the raid lore, you ever read the Mithrala lore? Mithrala's a pirate, which is really bizarre. That's a weird one. I don't know how that works. It seems strange to me, but there we go. They got Malice Darkblade. He's a more sort of stereotypical elven warrior in armor who's kind of crazy. One fun thing he does actually is he gets possessed by a demon and he goes into like this crazy demon mode, which is quite cool. That could work well enough. And then Rakarth, he's like a beastmaster. Not super interesting, I think, for raid, because he's more about collecting cool beasts in your armies. Doesn't translate super well. So Dark Elves, I honestly feel, is lacking a bit of an identity, and it's tricky enough to think of what you'd put in as a faction unity for Dark Elves. I think this one is one of the hardest ones. I would say probably I think I was pretty cool. I think my preference would be something like Crone Hellebron. Like some sort of, again, actually, I feel like, yeah, when I look at the most iconic Dark Elves for me are Lydia, Vizix, and Mithrala. They're all female. I think like the kind of crazy, creepy, evil female with dark powers. I think that fits pretty well. And I think the physicality of Crone Hellebron wading in with weapons and stuff, I think that would fit pretty well. So maybe something like that. But Dark Elves is a bit tricky. Knights Revenant, obviously a very powerful faction now in raid, especially with like Ancora and Narses. I mean, they're very knight themed, aren't they? There's a lot of actual just they're knights. So I think that's probably that would fit well. Someone who is dead and covered in armor. it's sort of what you want with the Knights Revenant. Something that fits into that. Like, I mean, Calvalax, very, very cool. Very poison theme, but fits in well. There's actually a good bit of poison, with Calvalax and Theodore. I actually guess they're the only ones. There's a bit of poison. There's some bombs. But I think definitely it's got to be a cool dude in armor would be my vibes for this. I think the closest examples, I've broken something here. We're fine. Everything's fine. Don't even worry about it. The Warriors of Chaos is probably the closest thing in Warhammer. Again, there's no sort of direct tie over to the Knights Revenant in raid. It's probably the closest one. I'll just show you some of these. Actually, most of them are actually demons that would probably apply more to the demon spawn. Let's take a look at those. Let's do this in reverse order. You've got Azael, who's for Slanesh. So they're the crazy sex demons. So he's like a crazy sex demon. Kind of cool. Festus, he's all about poison. Looks ridiculous. Village, he's actually a pretty interesting one. This guy's pretty cool. So he's like a big dude in armor, but he's actually being controlled by this creepy guy on the back of him. That could actually fit pretty well for some factions. That's a really cool design. Yeah, that's a really cool, creepy design. So he could fit well. He's a possibility. Valkia, she's like badass demon with a spear and a creepy shield. Fiery. That could work well for demon spawn as well. Be'lakor is a terrible picture. He's like, looks like a big black skin devil-y thing. Cool. Sigvald wouldn't fit at all. He's like really beautiful. He's like, again, he's with the sex demon guys. He's just, I'm absolutely gorgeous. And he's got a shield, which is a mirror, all that sort of stuff. Kolek, big stompy ogre centaur thing. Doesn't really fit at all with the Knights Revenant. I think something like Archaon would be your best sort of bet here. Just big armored badass. Now he's got a very fire theme. He could actually work pretty well for the demon spawn, something like Archaon. But I think some sort of, big, beefy warrior would fit really well with the Knights Revenant. Just, I'm a big armored dude, bringing it together. Probably with a bit of a damage focus again, I would think. It's quite an aggressive faction. Or you could also go the poison route with Knight Revenant. For the Dwarves, Strong faction again for me. I'm looking at the dwarves. When I see dwarves, I think tanky, right? You know, like Under Priest Brockney, he was tanky. Acrisia, she's tanky but hits hard. Mountain King, Tormund, Newt, right? They're tanky but they hit. I mean, Trunda, again, she's got ridiculously high HP, right? They're a very tanky faction. They're stout, they're stalwart. Quite different from, or well, there's some similarities but some differences to the Warhammer version, where in Warhammer, I guess the raid ones are more close to Lord of the Rings, I suppose. The Warhammer ones, there's quite a lot of technology and using guns and artillery and stuff like that, and engineering, which definitely doesn't come through in raid. So they've got their king. I think he fights on like a big throne or something that's carried by other dwarves. Maybe. Ungrim, Iron Fist, he actually reminds me a ton of Fralny, right? Fralny, the crazy red-haired Slayer King with a big axe. They're actually very similar, I think. Belagar, this would be my front runner for the dwarves. He even has like a big banner in game that fits, but just big armored guy with a shield. Again, could be a bit of a defensive damage to either. Maybe it's some max HP stuff going on, or tying into max HP with the newts and the acrisias. That could be pretty cool. Yeah, maybe something like that, honestly. He'd be my favorite, like the big armored dwarf. It's really classic. You've got Thorek. I think he's like got his runic magic. That again could work as a support, not super exciting. Grombrindle, he's a bit more of like crazy old wise ancient dwarf. That could be pretty fun. And he's got a lot of character. Or then you've got like an engineer guy, which I think doesn't fit. My favorite, I think, out of all these would be the Belagar, big tanky dwarf, but you could go in a few different directions for sure. And then we've got, was that the final faction or two? No, we've got two more. Shadowkin, very aggressive faction, right? This faction is very aggressive. They don't have, I feel like, too much long-term sustainability. They are more just, I mean, Harima makes your team super tanky, of course. But other than that, they are quite, we're going to attack and blow up. They're not really big on revivers, for instance. You know, not really something they're too keen on. Again, there's no clear parallel because Shadowkin is quite Japanese-themed, obviously. There is, I think, a Japanese faction in Warhammer, but it's one of the more minor ones. They have a Chinese faction called Grand Cathay. The cool thing about them is all of their legendary lords are dragons. So they have human forms and then they turn into dragons. I think these could fit somewhat well in as well with the Shadowkin. My favorite would probably be Miao Ying. Again, I think that you've got a lot of cool, badass female characters in this faction, so a female would fit pretty well with Lady Mikage, you know, Harima, Yumiko, Tatsu's kind of cool, but like Shuzen is in there, Riho. You got some cool stuff. You do have the monsters. You could go something monstrous like Michinaki or Riho, have that sort of monstrous demon vibe, or Taragi Hitatsu. That could work as well. I think, though, yeah, again, sort of either building on sort of an emperor fantasy or empress fantasy could work well, or maybe just like a badass samurai. I feel like Toshiro, he sort of already is doing the badass samurai sort of thing a bit. So I don't know. I maybe wouldn't be too keen on a samurai. I think the idea of more of like an empress would actually fit pretty well. Empress or emperor, buffing up the team. Again, it would be very aggressive, enabling them to go in and attack more and be, yeah, just speed and aggression and damage. I think that's what I'd like to see. Then finally, we've got the Silven Watchers. Funny enough, in Raid, I've never seen so many support champions in my life. My goodness, is this a support-heavy faction? They're all about the support. You've got the Wood Elves, which is a pretty direct correlation, really, in Warhammer. Let's just look at the inspiration here, because you've got kind of three very distinct themes. You've got Orion. Now, it's not clear from the picture, and he's actually like a big centaur, right? So he's a centaur. That's pretty cool. I think that fits well. Then you've got Durthu. It's not quite clear. He's sort of like an Ent with a giant sword, right? Massive tree guy. Drika, actually, again, is massive evil tree. Wouldn't really fit with Sylvans, but you get the idea. And then they've got the Sisters of Twilight. They're quite dull there. There's a couple of elves, but they fly around on birds in the game and shoot people. Wouldn't really, I think these two wouldn't translate to Raid well, but I think either of these would, either massive tree or centaur. I think centaur fits the faction unity theme more. I think massive badass tree would fit more with the mythical. I think the centaur kind of leading the charge, supporting, buffing up, could be shooting a bow or going in with a spear. I don't know. You could do lots of fun things with that. That would do well. And actually, maybe, again, that centaur being more of an attack champion would fit well. You've got so many of these supports. It'd be actually cool to have the faction unity champion be the centaur that's more about, I'm attacking fast and hard. I think that'd actually work pretty well. So yeah, listen, guys, there you go. Those are some of my thoughts on all of the factions. By the way, I think Shadowkin would be quite strong. I didn't mention that, but you've got, like I said, you've got Shuzen, Yumiko, even Lady Kimmy's not bad as well for Arena. Harima's obviously great. Lady Mikage, great for Arena. They've got great Hydra champions with like Toshiro. They'd be a very, Michinaki, etc. They'd be a very, very strong faction for sure. Dwarves would be pretty decent. Silven, they've got an interesting mix. This is where the faction unity could really bring them together and give them a good damage dealer, which is something that they really lack. They've got support for days, but they've got no damage. So faction unity damage for them would fit super well. But that's my thoughts on the faction unity champions. Were there any examples I gave today where you were like, wow, that actually would be super cool, they should do that? Do you have any ideas that are different from what I gave? Which faction, I guess most importantly, which faction are you looking forward to the most? For me, my 2 front runners to be excited about, actually, I'd probably pick 3. I'd say Shadowkin, obviously enough. They're probably the coolest faction. They're really strong. Shadowkin would be a good one. I'd also, believe it or not, say Skinwalkers. I'm a big Skinwalker fan. I'm excited to see what they do for Skinwalkers. That's really, when I started playing, it was the worst faction. I think it was probably without a doubt. Like 3 years ago, this faction sucked. They've really gotten a lot better since then. And then probably finally for me, actually really Knights Revenant. A lot of people probably say Undead, but I also really like the Knights Revenant. I think they're fun. So yeah, they'd be the ones I'd be most interested in. Shadow, Skinwalker, and the Knights. So yeah, there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.